Hey, welcome to an evening service here at Clinging Ridge Baptist Church. I'm so excited that you decided to join us as we continue our study through Genesis. We are going to wrap up chapter 25 today. We're getting introduced to Jacob and Esau and the story that begins following Jacob from this point forward for a while. And I'm excited for this. This brings in some major family dysfunction. And so if you've ever experienced that, then you're going to feel at home inside of this study. So before we get going, let's pray together. Jesus, thank you for today. Thank you for your love. Thank you for your incredible grace. Thank you for the chance that you've given us to be in your word today, that we get to study and learn about what how your history unfolded, how you first revealed yourself to humanity, and what it looked like as you set up the nation of Israel that eventually was going to point to Christ and lead to your church and your kingdom that was going to be established on earth. God, help us to see that picture. Let us look through the lens of Jesus every time we look inside of your Old Testament. And I pray, God, that it calls us to live life in a way that reflects the knowledge of you being in charge, of trusting in prayer, and of trusting your path even when it doesn't fit our culture. In your name I pray, amen. So to kind of start off, you guys know I like to open up with something that just kind of is an illustration to bring something out from the passage that we're going to read. But one of the things I've loved this for a long time, I love massages for my children. Now, here's the thing. It's not so much that they're good. They're not quite old enough yet to really like, because I like a deep tissue massage in my back, just really work on that. So what I've always done is had them walk on my back. Love it. Love the way it feels. I can get them walk on my back, on my legs. It feels so good. Jude's probably getting just on the edge of like it's starting to hurt a little more than it helps, but it still feels so good. I like it a lot. But Jude's always been the one that has known how to work the system, okay? He knows. Sometimes I can go and be like, hey, Jude, you want to walk on my back? And he'll say, yes, sure. Sometimes he'll come up and say, well, will you pay me to do it? And so, we'll negotiate prices and stuff like that. Sometimes it's $1 or $2, sometimes whatever. What's funny is Jude learned pretty quickly how to read me. And if I come up to him and if I ask in desperation because he can tell that I'm in some pain because of something I did the day before or 2 days before that, and he knows that I'm in a place where I really, really want a massage. And I'm like, oh, Jude, my back hurts so bad. Would you please walk on my back? That's when he knows he can say, well, I'm kind of trying to save up for this. Daddy, do you think you could give me $5? And he'll up the price because he knows how to read the situation really well, and he knows when to ask for a little bit more money. And he's always been able to do that. And then he knows the times when I'm like, hey, dude, you want to walk on my back? And he's like, oh, sure, fine. But he knows how to read it. He knows how to manipulate the situation for his benefit. And it's funny. It usually works because usually if I'm in as much pain as he sees on my face, a lot of times I'll be like, yes, I'll give you 10, buddy. Just I'll pay $1 a minute if you'll just walk on my back for as long as you will. And it works because he knows how I am, and he knows the situation. He knows what I'm seeing. He knows what I'm feeling, and he'll offer based on what I'm looking at and how far I can see. So that's kind of something we're going to see here in just a moment. So let's start reading in Genesis chapter 25, and I'll reflect back to this illustration in just a moment. But Genesis chapter 25, starting in verse 19. These are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham fathered Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Paddan Aram, the sister of Laban, the Aramean, to be his wife. Okay, we studied this already, right? So Isaac marries Rebekah after Abraham's servant goes and finds her, and this is such a beautiful story of just diligence and being a great servant, even when it meant he lost some of what he thought he might have gotten. Verse 21. And Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren. Let's pause there for a minute. Isaac's story, as we read through it, you can see some similarities that he gets to have with Abraham. We'll get to see more of them as we continue to study, and even more as you watch Jacob. You'll get to see even more similarities there where there's some stuff that happens. This is one of them where he marries a woman who is unable to have children. And so this is not connected to any sin. So a lot of times, especially the Jewish people, especially in Jesus' time, they had this belief that any kind of struggle, any kind of medical issue, any kind of problem with someone, if a deformity or a disability, was always connected to sin. And so they'd say, okay, which brings me to John 9, where they were asking, hey, Jesus, his disciples are asking him, why is this man born blind? Was it because he sinned in the womb, or was it because his parents sinned? So they had this belief that every single disability or struggle was connected to sin. Here we're seeing that Rebecca was not able to have children, but it's not connected to sin. It's just to be a part of the story. It's for the glory of God, which is what Jesus told his disciples. A man was born blind for the glory of Jesus, or for the glory of God. This story is so that we can look and see how powerful God is. It's not connected to sin. But some of the ways that Isaac does follow the footsteps of Abraham will let us see that there are generational sins that get passed down through families. Now, this is not something that, I don't think this is something that is done in a way that's without choice. I don't think this is just that because Abraham sinned, that meant Isaac absolutely was going to sin. But I do believe this, I've said this before. Children will follow in their parents' examples, especially in terms of sin. Or at least they're going to be tempted to follow in that example. And we're going to see the example here of several in several areas of showing favoritism, of deception, and other things that we're going to see inside the story that was set by Abraham, right? Abraham led the way in being deceptive and being a passive leader and showing some favoritism to one of his children. He led the way for this to go generations, and his sons and his son and his grandsons followed in this same path. So it says, though, let's continue in verse 21. And the Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. So just with Abraham, though in a far shorter time frame, God gave Isaac and Rebekah children. So this led me to some questions, because this is a miraculous prayer, right? And I know I've known several people who have been in this situation of being unable to have children and struggling, and really the pain that was caused over that was immense. And they'd spend lots of time in prayer, praying and asking God for children. And that's a hard place to be. And it's a hard prayer to ask for, because what you're afraid of a lot of times is that the answer is going to be no. So here's the question is, do you truly believe that God hears and answers your prayers? Do you really believe that? You see, Isaac, he believes this. He believes that God is the God who answers prayer. He knows this from his father Abraham, and they've seen this before. But he didn't have to believe it. But he does believe here, and he prays and asks God, God, please give me children. And he believes that God, A, is listening, and B, does answer. And that's a question you need to ask yourself of your own prayers. Do you only pray over your meals and just have a quick little God bless this food and God help us sleep well? Or do you truly pray to a God who is all-powerful, always listening, and will always answer, even if the answer might not be what you want it to be? Second of all, do you truly believe that God can do absolutely anything? And now that's a scary thought, though, right? Because if we say that God can absolutely answer my prayer in the way that I want him to, but he might not, then that puts us in a position of having to deal with, do we truly trust in this God? Do I trust his design even if it goes against what I want for myself? And I think, though, but the going back to this, I think the more basic primary question is, do I truly believe that God's listening, and do I truly believe he can answer my prayers? And he can answer them in ways that are miraculous and beyond anything I'm able to do. And I think that's a question you should stop and ask yourself even right now. Verse 22 says, the children, so Rebekah conceived, and the children, plural, struggled together within her. And she said, if it is thus, why is this happening to me? So she went to inquire of the Lord. All right, let's pause there for a minute. So Rebekah, at this point in the story, we know that she has not one, but at least two children inside of her, right? She is pregnant with multiple children, and they are struggling within her. She probably thought something was wrong. Now, I know this is going to come as a shock. I've never been pregnant, but I have been married to a pregnant woman 4 separate times so far in my marriage. And I know that pregnancy can be extremely difficult. Ashley has had, she gets very sick for like 20 straight weeks with just nonstop sickness and nausea and stuff. And I cannot imagine that. I've said this to her many times, that if it was men who became pregnant and had children, I think that there would have been one generation of humans on earth, and that would have been the end of it, because we would not be able to walk through that. I don't think we'd choose to do it like women have, because they're incredible, and God has just gifted them with so much strength. But inside of this, I've seen this. I know that pregnancy itself can be hard just alone. Having one baby can be a very difficult, painful struggle, right? And with Rebecca, she's pregnant with at least 2 children, and it says there's fighting within her stomach, right? They're fighting in her womb, and she's just, I think that she's thinking, what is wrong? Something's happening here. I think that this leads me to think that she's wondering if she's even going to die being pregnant, because she says, because of her question, if it is thus, why is this happening to me? If I'm just going to die here, if I'm just going to be pregnant, this is going to kill me. Why did God answer our prayers and let me become pregnant if I'm just going to die? I think she's asking that question. I think she's asking, why is this, why would this even go this direction if these children are at war within me and they're going to rip me apart and I'm not even going to survive this, and maybe they aren't either. Why did this even get answered? Yes. So she asked God, why is this happening? Maybe you've prayed that exact prayer before. Why is this happening? And God answers Rebekah. And the Lord said to her in verse 23, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. All right, so let's pause there just for a minute. So he says that it's not just that you have 2 children, you have 2 nations in your womb. Now, I think that if you're Rebecca, you could have a moment of of terror, right? Where you're thinking, wait, what? two nations? Because again, there's no way of her knowing exactly how many babies are in there at this point, I don't think, unless God has already told her, but we don't see that in Scripture. So she just knows that there's something going on inside of her that's not normal, that's very painful, that's very difficult, and she's asking God, what's happening and why? And his answer is, there are 2 nations at war inside of you, 2 of them in you. So these nations are her son, which we'll see here, her son Jacob, who becomes named Israel and is the next in the generation that fathers the nation of Israel. So we have the nation of Israel inside of Rebekah's womb at this time. We also see the nation of Edom inside of Rebekah, who is her other son Esau. All right, let's go on to what God said to her. The one shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. All right, so I'm going to read something from the Macarthur Bible commentary. This was contrary to the custom of patriarchal times, when the elder son enjoyed the privileges of precedence in the household, and at the father's death received a double share of the inheritance and became the recognized head of the family. Okay, so this goes completely against the norms of the time, right? So the norms of the time would say that the older son, no matter what, would be the one that would be the head of the household, would be the one that would be like the one that would take his father's place, and would also get a double portion of the inheritance. But God is not bound by customs, culture, traditions, or preferences of man. And that made me pause after writing that and ask this question, do I truly believe this? I want to read it again. God is not bound by customs, culture, traditions, or preferences of man. So what that means is, though we might have a way that we like to do things, we might have a way that is normal in our culture, we might have things that are seen as absolutely necessary in the world today, God is not bound to those things unless His Word says that He created them. So just because something is normal for us or a major preference of ours or the way that we've always done things does not bind God to that way. And so we see this here, God changing up a cultural norm right away, right? In one of the first few generations that is creating the nation of Israel, God already changes the system that everyone was used to. because it was such a simple thing. You always gave your firstborn all the stuff. This is the way it worked. Everybody does it. This is the way we've done it for generations. This is the way my father and grandfather and great-grandfather, all these people did it. Everybody did it. We all do it. This is the right way. And God says, it might be your right way, but it's not mine. And I'm going to bless the secondborn, because that's God's ability, is to change anything he wants to be for his own glory and for our good, even if it's against our customs, our culture, our traditions, and our preferences. All right, let's read about the birth of these twins. Verse 24, when her days to give birth were completed, behold, there were twins in her womb. So this is the first time that she really got to see there's only two. And again, I think there could have been at least a few moments of actual fear of, all right, so God, you said nations. Like, how many kids are we talking here? So there were twins in her womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy cloak. So they called his name Esau. Okay, this is going to be a question that you can't answer in front of anyone else, and you shouldn't, but I'm going to ask it in the privacy of wherever you're listening to this. Have you ever seen an ugly baby? Has that ever happened? Have you ever had that moment where a proud parent walks up, they're like, oh, isn't my baby adorable? And you're like, oh, yeah. All right, I just get that feeling. I mean, I just can't imagine a baby being born that is described like this, looking very cute. Like, this is just it's just funny to me. He came out completely red and his body covered like a hairy cloak. This was a hairy baby. Esau was born a man from birth, right? He came out of his mother's womb as a man, right? He was covered in hair. He was completely red, and we're going to see how this describes him even more later on. But man, that's Esau. So he's the firstborn. Afterward, his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel. So his name was called Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. All right, let's talk about Jacob for a minute. Jacob's name means he takes by the heel, but was a euphemism for saying he cheats. It's well named. We're going to study more about Jacob. This is a big part of his story, is how he tries to manipulate and cheat others to get what he wants, how he tries to read the situation to get more out of it for himself and to benefit himself. Jacob, I just want to take a second here and think about this. Imagine being named cheater from the moment you were born. I'm certain that Isaac and Rebekah did not intend this to be something that would be that would hurt the child. I'm sure they loved Jacob. But to have that name, especially, and it might have been something that was kind of just silly and funny. Oh, he had him by the heel from the moment he was born, and that's so cute. But they named him cheater, and this follows him. This follows him for a long time, and he falls right into step with that with his name. All right, so let's keep going. Verse 27, when the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man dwelling in the tents. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. All right, so Esau was this skillful hunter, a man that went out in the fields all the time. He was a man's man. He was probably loud. He was probably just constantly just the loudest guy in the room talking. He was probably, I'm being imaginative here, but I think he's probably a big guy. He's skilled at hunting. And in their culture, he's what they would have absolutely valued in a man, right? He was able to go out into the field and get kill game, go and hunt and get an animal and bring it home, and he could cook it, and it would be great, delicious meat. He was strong. He was big. He was all the things that this culture thought made a man, right? I think that some of those things can be the same in our culture. So other things are making a large paycheck, right? That makes a good man. You go out there and you've earned just this big paycheck. What a man. You go out there and you've done this. You've earned this high position. You've done this stuff. So think about the things that make our culture think of what a successful man is today. That's what Esau was, a successful man of his day. According to culture, he was everything a man should be. And yet Jacob is contrasted with him as being a quiet man dwelling in the tents. Jacob was not a man's man. He was not the guy that enjoyed hunting. He didn't go out and do that. He spent more of his time in the tent, which would have been not been considered manly by his culture, right? His culture would have been like, man, why do you spend so much time in the tent? That's where a lot of the women hang out. That's where like people who can't hunt go. That's where the old people stay. Why aren't you going out here with us in the field? Why don't you go out? Why don't you want to go out and hunt? Why don't you want to go out and hunt for our food or for an animal? Anyone think Jacob ever would have struggled with being compared to Esau? I think so. If you have siblings, maybe you've struggled with that yourself, right? Maybe one of your siblings just excelled in an area where you're very weak at, and that was a constant struggle with you, is feeling like you didn't live up to what your sibling set for you. Maybe you felt like you had to make up for it in some other area because you weren't this. I know that my entire family are great, my siblings anyways. I have an older brother, older sister, and a younger brother. All of them were great soccer players. Great at it. I was not a great soccer player. It just didn't come to me. I was okay. I could stay on the field, but I wasn't great at it. I had to find other things to help me feel adequate because I felt like that was something that made a failure out of me, right? I ran, and that felt kind of good, but I really did always struggle, especially through school, with thinking, man, I wish I was better at these other sports because running just isn't that cool. But with Jacob, I can't imagine being the quiet one who doesn't enjoy hunting, isn't very good at it, isn't how your culture would define a man or celebrate a man. And you have your brother, who is your twin brother, who's just slightly older than you, who is this manliest man that has ever been. The culture is like, oh, that's a man. Jacob, go be more like Esau. Why don't you follow him? He could teach you how to hunt. Just let him teach you. Why don't you let him show you what this is like? I'm sure Jacob struggled with this for a very long time. Then it says that Isaac loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So this favoritism comes honestly to Isaac. So this is a way that he follows in his father's footsteps. Remember, Isaac is Abraham's son that is going to continue the covenant, right? He is the son that is going to be legitimate and is going to got all of his inheritance. But Isaac was not Abraham's only son. It was his only legitimate son, his only son with his wife. But Isaac was not his only son. Abraham had another son named Ishmael and several more sons by another concubine after Sarah's death. But this was his favorite son. And all of the others were sent away, right? At Abraham's death, Isaac received a full inheritance, while his half-brothers were given a gift and sent far away so they couldn't compete with Isaac. So Isaac experienced, this is what it feels like to be the favorite of my father. And then Isaac has a favorite son as well. I think this is a generational sin that we're getting to see inside of this family. But Rebekah, though, she does follow the same footsteps too, right? So Rebekah, while Isaac favors Esau and says, oh, look, that's a man. I wish Jacob was more like him. Rebekah doted on and loved Jacob for who he was. She saw the value in his quietness, and she saw the value in his intelligence, right? Jacob was extremely smart, and Rebekah preferred him. So we see dysfunction all over this family right at the beginning. Now let's keep reading. You guys have probably read this story before. So verse 29, once Jacob was cooking stew. Esau came from the field and he was exhausted. And Esau said to Jacob, let me eat some of that red stew, for I am exhausted. Therefore his name was called Edom. Now for the record, Edom is sounds like the Hebrew word for red. So his nickname is Edom for a couple of reasons. First of all, because of this story of him just loving this red lentil stew and saying, I want some of that red stew, please, I need it now. But also because of the fact that he was born completely red and just covered in, covered in what seems to be fur when he's born. But he comes in and says, I'm exhausted, give me some of that red stew. And so Jacob says, sell me your birthright now. Now the birthright, what that was the double portion of inheritance and the right to be the family chief and priest of this time. That was what you got for being firstborn, right? That was the privilege of firstborn. Jacob was a manipulator, right? Again, he was smart. He could see the big picture. He saw a lot of stuff nobody else saw. His perspective was big. And he manipulated very well, and it only grew. And this manipulation would only grow as we continue to read about him. And he played a very long game, right? He didn't see what was happening just right now. He saw down the road. He was looking to the future. He was constantly, he was a schemer. And I think this is really mainly due to the fact that God blessed him with a great intelligence. Jacob was a very smart man. So his brother comes in, this manly man that has, able to hunt and do all this stuff, and was just, celebrated constantly for being this great man. He comes in, and Jacob has cooked some lentil stew, and Esau walks in and says, "I need that now. I'm so exhausted. I've done so much. I can't go another step without eating." And I think Jacob's face lights up as he just sees the same way Jude does when he hears me say, "Jude, my back is killing me. I need a massage." That is Jacob at this moment getting to say, "I bet you'd be willing to pay for this stew. I bet you'd be willing to pay a lot for this stew," because he knew his brother Esau. And he says, "Okay, give me your birthright." So Esau says, "I am about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear to me now." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Here's the thing. I don't think Esau was about to die. Now, this is conjecture. This is just my perspective, my interpretation of this passage. But the fact that he ate and got up and walked off, I don't think he was actually about to die from hunger or from exhaustion. I don't think he was at the point of literal death. People who are dying of starvation don't eat one meal and walk away feeling good. And it takes time to recover from that level of starvation or of exhaustion. And so I think that what happens here is we see that while Jacob is extremely intelligent and looks at a big perspective of a big picture and schemes and plans ahead, he's playing chess, we see Esau playing checkers, right? And what Esau sees is, I'm so hungry I'm going to die, which was just an exaggeration. He just felt hungry. And so he thought feeling full and eating some of that stew now is better than enjoying my birthright later. He couldn't see past his present feelings or circumstances. Do you struggle with that? Do you struggle with seeing past your current circumstance? Is that what defines it? Let me be honest here. I struggle with that. I can easily struggle with not being able to see past what's happening right now. That if right now things are hard or difficult or bad or stressful, that it can feel like it will always be that way. And that can lead you to make decisions that might make you feel good right at this very moment, but that will have long-term consequences later that will be disastrous. Esau couldn't see past his present circumstance to see future good. And so because he couldn't see future good getting past this very moment of hunger, he sold something that was worth infinitely more than a bowl of stew for a bowl of stew, right? I wonder how often we struggle and do the same thing metaphorically. I wonder how often we settle for a bowl of stew when God's got a birthright planned for us. When God has a big plan for us that's coming, and it probably involves us walking through some difficult stuff. And all we can see is, man, if I just ate this right now, I'd feel better and I'd be fine. And we despise God's plan for us by settling for the silly stuff in the moment. Let's wrap up with a couple of questions. Do you understand that God has a plan for you as well? So God had plans for both Jacob and Esau. And God's plan is coming about here. And part of the reason or part of how God uses these men to make his plan come about is Jacob's extreme intelligence let him see way, way, way past his present circumstance. He probably had hurt in ways that Esau had never felt pain. He had felt despised by his father and felt like he had not been appreciated as a man. And that pain was infinitely greater than Esau's hunger. Esau hadn't really struggled ever. And so when he first struggled, or felt like he was struggling, he went to the quickest answer he could. Instead of saying, what's the end goal? What's the plan here? What's really happening? What's more important? God has a plan for you, and sometimes it's going to involve walking through a difficult present circumstance. Are you able to see past your present difficult circumstance and see to the fact that it will end? It's not going to be the way things are forever. and that there might be something great that God is leading you toward, can you trust him for it? If you don't trust him for that, can you start praying and say, God, will you help me to see why I'm walking through what I'm walking through? A great question that Rebecca asked, right? When she says, if this is how it's going to be, if I'm going to, because she thought, I really believe this, she thought she was going to die from her pregnancy, and she's saying, well, why is this even happening? God didn't get angry at Rebecca for asking, why am I in the circumstance I'm in? And I don't think he'll get angry at you for that either. So what if instead of settling for lentil stew, which I think could be anything from just a small like escape that you have to not deal with life, whether it's sports or if it's a book or if it's video games or whatever it is that you're into, and you just escape into that because it just feels better for a little bit, and then you go back to the daily grind. Or maybe it's down to actual sin, that you escape into that sin because that sin makes you feel good for a small amount of time, but begins a vicious cycle of then loathing and hating yourself for that sin, that secret thing that's in your life. And so then you go out and say, I'll never do that again. But then as you get stressed and struggle again, then you go back into that sin, and this cycle that maybe you've lived through. That's what I think the lentil stew can be for each of us. Can you take a moment and say, God, I need to see past my present circumstance. Instead of escaping to lentil stew, can I just take a minute and stop right where you are and say, God, why am I here? And why is this so difficult? And why is this happening? And why am I feeling this? And why am I not appreciated? Why am I not getting this job? Why am I, whatever? Why are my children going through this? Ask him why, and then just listen. And trust for the answer. And even if you don't receive an answer the way that you would like to, walk in obedience with a perspective that's bigger than your current circumstance and say, eventually, this will not be this way. So if that's true, if it's true that this won't always be like this, what's the right answer outside of this circumstance? And what's the best, most God-honoring thing I can do right now? Is it sitting down and selling out God's plan for me for a bowl of stew? Or is it standing up and continue to walk forward? Because Christ has bought you with a price of his life. And that means he does have a plan for you. Jesus, I pray you call us to understand and identify this story. Lord, inside of this, it's not so much a good guy, bad guy story. I think it's a human story. We know that your plan was for Jacob to get the birthright, and we know that your plan was to continue the nation of Israel out of Jacob, who was the second born, who was the least deserving, wasn't the manly man, who wasn't the one that the society would have looked at and said, that's the guy that's going to be the great nation. They would have looked at Esau easily and picked him. But instead you chose Jacob. And God, you had a plan for him, and you also had a plan for Esau. God, I pray that you'd help us to see you have a plan for us. And that sometimes that plan is going to call us to walk through some very difficult times and difficult circumstances. And inside of those difficult circumstances, just like Esau, we are very tempted to settle for lentil stew over continuing to walk towards your final plan for us. Help us not to settle. Help us not to believe that our current circumstance is all that we'll ever be. And help us to see that in your plan there is something better. In your name I pray, amen. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I hope you have a great rest of your week.